Okay, so this section is about innovating in our local food systems, and I want to basically make a plug with my now 9 minutes to focus on the social side of innovation and the places that we really need to innovate socially. All right, so I'm following off of Kristine's quote from the United Nations of the paradigm shift that we need to undergo. So here's the challenge. The sustainable transformation of our food system requires a full-scale paradigm shift. I don't feel like I need to belabor that point with this audience. But here's the catch. Most citizen consumers today live in cities, and they're completely disconnected from agriculture, and they really don't have a tremendous amount of awareness of even the extent to which their personal relationship to food matters, and that it affects our ability to undergo this transformation. So it's not just about new or historic techniques in agriculture. It's also, we need to bring in basically the social dimensions of generating support for the changes that many farmers would like to engage in. Okay, so urban agriculture, and particularly community gardens, has a tremendous amount of potential to help to foster this transformation through basically social engagement. So there's been a lot of research just in the last 10 years or so on the topic of urban agriculture and community gardens, coming from the social sciences and talking about all of the positive outcomes that have come out of a number of initiatives in urban agriculture. And here's just a handful that I think are particularly important. One is that engaging in a community garden fosters integration across ethnicities, cultures, class, age, etc. And this is important. It doesn't sound like maybe it's related to transforming our food systems, but we need to, if we're going to approach this as particularly at a local level and at a community level, then we need to address basically the social and the cultural barriers that are preventing people from feeling included in that transformation process. We don't want to unintentionally exclude people, particularly those people who could really benefit from the increased food security that a local food system can provide. Secondly, urban agriculture is basically, and particularly community farms and community gardens, provide third spaces, in a sense, in the community for gathering. So people, when they basically participate in a community garden, they're not just pulling weeds, they're not just planting seeds and growing their own food in all cases. You're basically creating opportunities for conversations, and this is a public space. And you know what? In cities, we're running out of public spaces. We're running out of places for people to get together and gather in places that don't involve consumption, that don't involve being overwhelmed by retail opportunities. Community gardens provide this space. It also, in many cases, research has shown that it has led to further civic engagement. That basically engagement in a community garden has led a number of participants, community garden participants, to take further steps in engaging in the community, politically or otherwise. And then finally, and most obviously, is it creates agri-food awareness. It gives people a better understanding and sensitivity and consciousness of what it takes to grow food, what are the limitations, and gives us more respect for where our food comes from. The biggest potential, I think, really is that engaging in community farms and urban agriculture more generally is basically the potential to transform all of us from food consumers into food citizens as we start to think more broadly about our personal relationship to food, but also where our food comes from and who's engaged in providing my food. All of those questions basically lead to a higher level of citizenship around food. So food production and consumption practices are inevitably political, but we aren't necessarily always aware of the extent to which they are until we become more conscious about food. Engaging directly in food production and processing, also, it may sound tiny, but every kilo of food that is produced outside of that conventional agro-industrial system is basically a disruption in that conventional agribusiness food system. And then finally, as was mentioned before, urban agriculture takes place in public spaces, but urban agriculture and community gardens in particular often take place sort of under the political radar, despite the fact that I think what's going on in there is very political and has a tremendous level of potential to basically change the nature of agri-food systems. But it's so far, at least, urban agriculture activities tend not to generate the same level of political opposition or any political opposition at all in comparison to other kinds of food activism. It's not inevitable, however, that a community garden can offer these benefits. Not all gardens are alike. This is a picture of an allotment in the UK that I visited a couple of years ago. And a typical allotment is basically each individual family has their own plot and they go nurture it on their own time. And there's basically a minimal level of engagement amongst other plot owners in that allotment. And so that is not necessarily a system that is conducive to basically achieving all of the social potential that a community garden can have. Which brings me to Prairie Urban Farm. So one of my other hats, in addition to being a professor and a speed demon on Highway 2, is I'm the director of Prairie Urban Farm, which is entering into its 4th year of production. I like to think that we are more than just a community garden because we focus on a number of objectives above and beyond growing food. Number one is we really try to reach out and generate an inclusive and collective volunteer base. So we've got people out there who are between the ages of 12 and 70. We have at least a dozen different ethnic groups involved and people from all different sectors of society. Collective management, so rather than having an individual plot-based system, we all basically work together to make decisions collectively on the land. We also try to instill amongst our volunteers that we're here for a broader purpose. It's great that you're enthusiastic about coming and joining us and growing food, but we also want to talk about food security in the city. We also want to talk about agroecological principles. We also want to talk about where your food has come from in the past. And we also basically try to provide opportunities for active learning for everyone involved. Okay, so don't have much time left. Just some observations that I'd like to share so far is the extent to which those intercultural and intergenerational connections have been taking place have just really been remarkable and heartwarming and above and beyond anything that I really anticipated seeing. So we basically have people talking about what to do with dandelion roots, and people from their own background, whether it's in Russia or China, are talking about how they make tea with them. I have spoken with other individuals whose grandparents had rice plots in China about how to make basically raised pathways between the plots. So those kind of intergenerational connections have just been really incredible, but it brings people together that otherwise would never have crossed paths. And so we're learning about each other in addition to learning about growing food together. Sharing of those multiple knowledge systems, and it's just inevitable that when people show up, they start asking questions, not only about food, but about the people who are around them and what they know about food and how they used to grow food and how they cook at home. And through all of this, just maybe, we're experiencing some levels of empowerment among our volunteers too.